Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today. We're excited for our next, I think, fifth, if I'm counting correctly, presentation of the day and panel conversation, third panel conversation. Or second, excuse me. So we're really excited to have with us today for a M&A discussion for specifically the EMS industry. Obviously a very hot topic, and those that we have on the panel today definitely experts in this and can probably speak to how this has evolved over the past few years. But just for brief introductions before I will get out of here, we have Stephanie Barone here from PriceKubecka. She heads up our sales in the North America, South America region. Also Jason from PriceKubecka. Tom Kastner, who is an M&A advisor, and then also Steve is the president and CEO of Zentech Manufacturing. So all definitely, players in this game and can definitely speak to a little bit of the conversation of what's going through this. So I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie and get the conversation started, and then we will be back later. So Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and take.
Here we go. Hi, I'm Stephanie. Steve, Jason, Tom, thanks you guys for being here and taking time out of your extremely busy days. First question we've got for you guys, and everybody on the audience, please feel free to chat in your questions. We'll try to get to those as well. Over the past couple of years, there's been a huge increase in the M&A activity in the EMS industry. We feel like we've seen that. Are you guys seeing the same thing? And what do you think is driving that trend?
Well, I've been here at Zentech for about 17 months, and I'm seeing the same kind of deal flow that I think has been pretty constant from over the years. It's just we're being much more specific and much more selective about what we're going after. But it's really not too different than it's been. And the only thing that changes over the years seem to be the multiples that the market brings.
Yeah, I would agree.
What do you think is driving the trend? Sorry.
I would agree in our practice too. We're seeing, at least steady deal flow, if not increased deal flow during this time. It's kind of interesting to think of.
And Tom?
Yeah, sure. No, we're definitely seeing a very active market. And, it's not all due to Steve. There's other buyers out there as well. But Steve's definitely one of the ones leading the charge, I think. And look, I apologize for my video not working. It's too bad. I actually got a haircut yesterday just for this. And, it's really a shame. But I can't tell her that the video is not working, or I'll never get another haircut. But we're definitely seeing a lot of activity. Kind of like Steve said, though, that activity has been strong really for 2-3 years at least. And if it weren't, I do think if it weren't for the COVID situation, activity would be higher this year. But I do think it's going to continue to be at a high pace, both for companies that are doing well and for, unfortunately, companies that are not doing so well.
Do you think that the increased sophistication of the PCBA, marketplace, is that contributing to that need for consolidation, or is it all?
I don't think the sophistication of the product itself is what dictates, because you still have companies that are led by people who have been in the industry for a long time, and then you have others who are fairly new to the industry. And I think it's the sophistication of the underlying companies itself with the IT resources and the HR resources and how the business is being managed, which really differentiate the best in class from the not so best in class.
Okay.
Yeah, agreed. I do think probably the number one factor is the average age of, and apologize to anyone out in the crowd, but it's the average age of the owners is getting up there. It's not exactly a young man's industry, or young person's industry, I should say. Certainly there are younger people who are taking over for their fathers or uncles or parents. But I think that's the number one factor. And another huge factor is also, related to Zentech and others, is that there's a lot of private equity money in the sector. I think there's at least, as far as what's published, at least 20 private equity firms that have investments in the industry. And of course, there's a number of public companies as well. Although, interestingly, the large public companies have not been doing deals. It's really the medium size and the small contract manufacturers who are doing the vast majority of deals. And then, of course, the sophistication, a lot of that is customer driven, but also, the need to have the latest equipment, the right certifications, the right training. It's been hard to get people. Those are also driving factors as well.
And do you foresee continued consolidation? And I'm actually curious to hear about that, both US and globally. How do you feel about like Europe and Asia Pacific?
Well, actually globally, I don't have that much of an idea. I do, right now it's tough to gauge what the foreign interest in the US is. And I mean, non-North American. I think there would be a lot more interest if there was more travel. I think everything we're talking about here probably applies to Europe as well. And but I think the Asian suppliers, a lot of them would love to have facilities here, but with travel and government restrictions, it's not easy for them to make acquisitions here. But I certainly see the trend continuing. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
There's something like 700, according to our database, something like 700 companies in the U.S. who do SMT assemblies. And there's going to be a lot of consolidation.
So I hate to step over Tom, but I think from the data that we put together from the IPC, I'm also a board member of the IPC. We have about 1,000 companies that we believe are U.S. centric that have facilities, or 1,000 facilities, and maybe 700 companies, but there's about 1,000 facilities around the U.S. If I go back 30 years ago, it was probably 1,200. So as companies consolidated over the years, there are also the emergence of spin-offs and new companies, and I think we're going to continue to see the roll-up in consolidation, and I think it'll go on for a long time. There is a lot of money in the private equity sector, as Tom indicated, but here comes warning number one for everybody who's listening today who might be a potential seller. If you're going to pick a private equity partner, make sure you pick the right one. I mean, it's really key to get somebody who understands the business, maybe has a history in the business, has some operators that have been in the business, and also care about the people that they're about to acquire as much as the business itself. So it's very important to do your homework on who your potential buyers are as well.
And that kind of leads me into my next question, which was really about tips for people who do want to sell their business. I think, I can't remember who it was that said, this isn't a young people's game, right? We do have a lot of folks that are getting older and looking to sell.
I'm not sure I like that. I feel like I'm still a young person.
My grandmother passed away about a year ago. She was 109 and mentioned that, when daughter passed the mirror every once in a while, she'd think, oh, who is that old lady in my house? And then she would realize it was her. So I still feel like I'm forever 32, and I'm not. But when should business owners begin thinking about selling their business? And what are some good steps for them to take to prepare to sell?
Well, in an ideal world, the day the owner establishes the business or joins the business is when they should start thinking about how they want to exit. Right. Because if your goal is to build a sustainable business that's going to make money for you and whoever buys it, you want to make sure you put the right infrastructure in place so that whoever the sellers are, you're going to attract a level of seller who will appreciate the sophistication and the work you've done. That would be for who you hire, how your team is, Tom talked about the equipment, what equipment you buy, how often and how much you're investing in CapEx and your IT infrastructure, your customer base. You don't want to get a bunch of startup companies that all have problem paying their bills, because that's not going to attract the same kind of multiple as if your customer base are 4 or 5 Fortune 100 companies. You also don't want to have a company where 60% of your revenue is one customer, unless you have a plan to manage out of that, which usually entails either growing out of it or losing or cutting back on that customer, which you don't want to happen. So you need to look at all facets of the business every day and really continue to march towards that goal. And then you want to look and find the professionals and the buyers, the bankers who are going to appreciate the things you brought to that business.
Well, I was going to let Jason.
I feel like Jason had a question, had a thought on that.
I can't see him anymore, though.
That was exactly going to be my comment too. Whenever you start your business or whenever you take over, you should be trying to figure out how to get out of it. And just to echo what Steve said, is it's basically setting up the infrastructure to build a business that somebody wants to buy. And when you talk about management teams, you talk about inventory processes, you talk about all the things that make a business something that somebody wants to acquire, and maybe not looking at it as how you are today, but how can I scale my business to get to a point where somebody wants to acquire it. And so as you're thinking about CapEx, you're thinking about how you're funding your equity or your debt structures, what that looks like, and how you're getting to those places. I think that's important from day one, which is just if that's, you're kind of starting with the end in mind, and the end in mind is how do I get out of this business at the very beginning of it. I think you work your way into a place that you have a business somebody wants to buy.
Yeah, this is what happens when you get a bunch of finance guys to give you financial advice. They always say, well, you should have started 20 years ago.
Jason just brought up a point that, that's tremendously important. And that is, what's your banking structure? What's your debt structure? What's your equity structure? And, I've been involved for the last 35 years, probably, limited to about 20 to 25 different deals. But when we acquired Zentech, which is we being Blackburn partners and myself and some members of the management team, for the first time ever in a transaction, our senior lender actually came to us and said, "Can we stay in the deal?" So they were the senior lender for the seller, and today they're our lender. And I've never seen that. So the relationship with your bank and how it's structured and the communication and just the overall overall banking relationship is really key pre and post, because you got to deal with everybody.
And this is a really real key point. So I'd like to continue on it, but in a lot of industries, let's say newer industries, whether that's IT services or in electronics, say IoT related companies, a lot of younger entrepreneurs start the company with the intent to sell. It's not a generational thing. There's not a family business. And they want to be in it for 3 to 5 years or so, and then sell it and move on to being a serial entrepreneur. Whereas businesses that were started in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was much more of a generational idea. And really, no matter what your philosophy is, if like Steve said, if you start off with the idea of selling, you're a step ahead. So the answer to the question of when you should start to prepare is, well, if you haven't started yet, well, tomorrow, if not today. And you'd be amazed at entrepreneurs who start in their basement, struggle, work nights and weekends for 20 years, skip vacations, have personal guarantees, invest most of their money in the business, and they don't spend a minute preparing for the sale. I mean, their idea of preparing is calling, me or their attorney or their CPA, or they get 25 emails or calls a week from buyers, but really have put no time at all into it. So whether it's, talk to your attorney or CPA or M&A professional, or do some research on the internet. And I don't mean to sound flippant, but buy a copy of M&A for Dummies. It's probably the best book out there. At least read the graphics. But be prepared to spend a lot of time preparing, and it's absolutely worth it.
So, question, how do you get past those confidentiality concerns? Like, I want to sell my business, but I don't want everybody to find out that I want to sell my business, because then they know I'm selling my business, right? Like, how do you massage that?
There's multiple answers to that. I mean, I've looked at books, I've looked at information on companies where after signing mutual non-disclosure agreements, you find out that everything is very heavily redacted. Well, if the company is one that you're not very familiar with, it's going to take you a while to find out what's underneath the hood. If it's a company that's that you're familiar with, the owners, you may be in similar markets, you know their supply chain, you may already know all the information. So and it still may not be published, but there's information that you know. I mean, I've been involved with the EMS Management Council of the IPC since 1987 when we started it. So hundreds of people that run businesses have been to the meetings over the years, and who you get into conversation, who their customer base is, and when you get into a process, as you move forward in the process, and it's like a funnel because you'll be dealing with less and less players each step of the way, more of your business is going to be exposed, because the day you close, the buyer should know everything about that business that you do. So now the question is, how do you manage, opening up the curtain? One of the things that,
I thought Jason looked like he had a hot sports opinion about that.
No, I mean, it's definitely a concern, and it's a concern that's valid. But I think, not to just copy everything Steve says, but I think the industry itself is pretty common. There's commonality between players, and you understand who's doing what, and have relationships that even though you might be wanting to sell, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're showing everybody everything at all at the just through mutual conversations. So not a real hot sports opinion, but kind of lukewarm there. So for everybody.
Yeah, it's a tough question. When you sell your home or corporate real estate or something, you put a sign out in front and you put it on the internet for everyone to see. With a business, it's tougher because you got people involved, and people will mess everything up. And many owners are worried that every employee is going to have their resume on the street, and every customer is going to start looking for another supplier. And the owner might be 85 and worried that everyone's going to be highly concerned that he's going to retire, whereas most people are like, thank God he's able to enjoy his retirement. So there is a trade-off between the risk of a breach of confidentiality and expected valuation in terms. In theory, the more buyers you go out to, the more likely you're going to get a higher price and better terms. And we try to structure all of our projects in a way that the client feels comfortable. And some clients are absolutely happy with us blasting the executive summary to 10,000 people, and others want us to contact 5. And then most projects are kind of in between. But again, for the owner, it's really important to do some research and look at different types of processes in order to make sure they're kind of comfortable with what's being suggested.
Okay. And Tom, what do you think makes a company more attractive to buyers?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, the big thing is profitability and growth. I mean, that's obvious. Obviously, being prepared. We talked a little bit about deal killers like customer concentration and so on. So that the things that are attractive are kind of obvious: growth and great customers, great equipment, good team. The biggest deal killers are customer concentration, key person risk, underinvestment, and not being prepared, and other things like too many surprises, but certainly if the company is growing, and especially these days, if the company is growing in this environment, and it's not something fluky, it looks like it's sustainable, then the company should be that much more attractive.
And there's a couple of things that are interesting with respect to what Tom said. I've seen a lot of books over the years where everybody said last year was great and next year is going to be phenomenal. This year we're having a problem, and that raises red flags all the time. The other issues that Tom mentioned, customer concentration, the team, the customer concentration issue isn't necessarily a deal killer, but it may change the multiple, because you have the risk of that customer leaving, and it may also cause the buyer to want to put some kind of an earn out to make sure that customer stays around, and they're paying for the profitability in the future that the customer would contribute. So the structure of the deal based on all of those risk factors can change based on all those risk factors.
You're jumping ahead on my question, Steve. I have a question about structures that are better for sellers versus buyers, but we're not there yet.
All right.
What are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing that are common mistakes? What are some common mistakes?
By buyers or sellers, or?
Really, mostly for sellers right now, but I mean, I'm interested in what you think both ways.
The one thing that Tom talked about was retention of the team. So one of the things, you don't necessarily want to let your whole team know, or I might want to, but a lot of the sellers don't want to let their team know what's going on. But that doesn't mean that they can't sit down and say that, we want to make sure that you stay, your team stays for a period of a couple of years, so that they're well beyond the horizon of what it takes to close a transaction. So you may want to take a look at employee retention plans. You may want to look at some kind of an equity option plan for your key people, just so they know whatever happens that they're going to be a part of it and not be on the outside looking in. I saw a company, this was years ago, that got acquired by a private equity firm, and the sellers were approached by the team that was running this operation and said, I know we're selling the company. What's your plan for us? Are we getting a retention plan? And the person who was running the company said, no, there's no need to give you a retention plan. And the whole team during the process picked up and bought another company. So, it was really a reflection on, and I'm biting my tongue real hard not to mention the moron who was the head of the company. But, here's a case where if they would have thought about the people a little more, they would have actually had something to sell that would have created value for them.
Well, I would say one common mistake we haven't really mentioned yet is sort of overhyping the company, and or thinking it's the best company in the world, and yet sales are hovering around 5 million. It might be a great company, just not necessarily an industry leader, so to speak. And then owners not really being flexible when their baby's called ugly, because nobody wants their baby to be called ugly. We all think it's the most beautiful baby in the world, but you ain't no Sanmina or at 5 million in revenue, or even at 25-50. So I think let's kind of put that under the headline of unreasonable expectations, whether that's value or the process or the types of questions or feedback you might get.
The other mistake that I think a lot of sellers make comes to the valuation. It's easy for a buyer to sit down and put a letter of intent together and say, we're going to pay, 100 times this. And then as soon as they start due diligence, they're already planning on renegotiating the deal. So a mistake that a seller would make would be to just take the highest number that's put on a piece of paper in front of them. They really need to do their homework. Who are the private equity firms? What history do they have in financing and closing the transaction? What history do they have of delivering a transaction at the multiple that they've committed to? And when I had the same discussion about getting involved with a private equity firm 2 years ago to do the deal we did at Zentech, there weren't a lot of people that I would have come out of retirement to work with, and I really believe that the guys I work with are phenomenal. And you have to really do your homework and not just sign up for the shiniest new object. You want to make sure that these are going to be your partners. They're going to be your financial partners. They're going to be your business partners, and you have to like them, and you have to respect them, and you have to believe they're going to add value. And it's really important not to just jump at something because it looks great at first blush.
That's great life advice.
We've had a couple of our customers the same type of deal. It's they've got a good deal, but they didn't necessarily do the due diligence on the private equity that came in, and then they got their money, but from a transition, and they expected to work for 2 years, and both of them are gone within 6 months, and employees that were there that were key employees are gone at this point in time because it wasn't the right partner in that deal, and so if the ultimate goal is to just get paid and get out, then hey, take the highest amount of money. But if it's the goal of continuing the company, creating a great relationship with the private equity group or whoever's coming in, it's going to be your partners. Those are things that we see mistakes in too, and we see mistakes too. And since I'm a CPA on the accounting side, we see mistakes on how people track inventory inside of their system that's being conveyed to the buyer, which creates conflict down the road, whether it be a working capital adjustment or whether it be some kind of valuation methodology down the road. And so going into the transaction with your financials not in order, I think is a common mistake that we see also. Really making sure that the inventory you show on the balance sheet is truly the inventory that you have, and it's not a bunch of worthless inventory because you want to. I love inventory. I can sell this inventory. Somebody's going to buy this at some point in time, and expecting that to be something that you're going to get value for in the transaction. I've seen that be, where we just, as we're going through a quality earnings report or as we're doing those things with the owner, it's just a shock to them that I'm getting dinged because I've got this inventory that I think is valuable, but it's not valuable to the buyer too. And so we've had that challenge several times with clients going through this process that is, it's uncomfortable for us on the backside as you're trying to have to fight that. It doesn't start the relationship with the new owner well when you're having to fight over those valuations and those kind of things.
There's so one of the things that Jason said is tremendously important, and that is about inventory. I looked at one company once where they had a spreadsheet which showed all the inventory, and it showed also the last time there was activity on that inventory. And then they had a column that was MSA, Manufacturing Services Agreement. And they said if they had an MSA, that they were sure they were going to be able to collect this excess or obsolete inventory. What they didn't say was that this customer disengaged 3 years ago. They had an MSA, but they never enforced their rights. So they're sitting on a pile of inventory that has no value. Really understand what Jason's saying about the value of that inventory, the value of your assets, and really what they're worth to the buyer, but more importantly, what are they really worth to the seller right now? If you don't do a deal, what's that pile of parts in the stockroom really worth to you? That's huge.
Y'all are setting up softballs for me, and it's killing me not to throw them in there, but I'm not. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, we harp on preparation a lot, but that inventory issue comes up all the time. Owners, there's always a pot of gold at the back of the warehouse. And, if they were prepared every year and, properly wrote off inventory or, enforced whatever agreements, they'd be much better prepared. mistakes by buyers. I think there's a big one is being sort of condescending towards the seller. We see a fair amount of larger buyers who, or maybe not too experienced buyers as well. Talk to a company with 10 or 20 million in revenue and say, well, you don't have Oracle or SAP, and you don't have the newest this or that. So it's going to cost us money to buy you, or something like that. The other mistake is really to ignore culture and people. And there's a tendency to think, well, we're both in medical products, so the culture must be the same. And the owner seems like a nice person, so must be a good culture. And then you find out later that the practices and culture and policies are all different. And there's nothing that'll make people walk out more quickly than a big culture conflict.
Not so much a mistake, but guidance that I think anybody considering selling is highly important, is to make sure that the professionals that you're using for all aspects of your business and all aspects of the deal are people who understand the industry, they understand relationships. So, I know Jason's firm gets involved intimately with their clients and talk about how to structure the business. They're not just doing their taxes, seeing each other once a year. It's important that the people understand your business, they understand your people. From a sales standpoint, you may think you're saving a little money by not hiring an investment banker, but the banker is going to bring you more money too. So, you want to make sure that, all of the people that are doing things for you are familiar with the EMS industry. They've got a track record. They've got a relationship with you. And, it's really important that you don't try to cheap out at the last minute. You have millions of dollars of equipment and inventory, and you got big resources, and you got thousands of square feet. And if you try to save money while you're doing a deal, you're not going to get the best deal for yourself.
Hey, I like that.
I was talking to one of my German peers the other day, and he said, it was Finnish. It was Yanni from Finland. And he said, well, if you spend $1 on a horse, you're getting a horse that's worth $1. Like, you get what you pay for, right?
One of these days, when we're not on this call, somebody can ask Chintan how he and I met. So we'll save that for another day.
I heard that right before we met. So, glossing over that, what are some of the ways that EMS companies can improve their value, prior to getting the bankers involved? Like, I'm thinking about this. What can I do now? Maybe I didn't start thinking about this 20 years ago when I started my business. What can I do now to improve my value?
There's a lot of different parts of that answer. The first one is,
good. We've got some time.
Is the customer base. I've met with companies where nobody from the company has gotten in front of the customer face to face. Now, I understand the last 10 months have been different in our lives, but let's talk about pre and post. You got to visit your customers. You've got to know that the customers have a problem before they're telling you and they're slamming the door on the way out. So, the relationship with the customer, because a big part of due diligence, you've got to understand the customer's markets, how the customer pays their bills, how they expect you to perform, what agreements you have with them that protect the assets that you buy on their behalf, and that's a huge piece of it. You've got to make sure that your CapEx, that your equipment is, it doesn't have to be brand new and shiny, but it has to be well maintained. You have to have a track record of that. You have to have the right certifications. You have to have the right environment of controls. How do you control your inventory? How are you controlling your financial metrics, your payables, your receivables, your cash days? How are you managing that? How does your system, control that? How much of what you do, you walk into a place and they say, well, we're using this system that's about 15 years old for our ERP, and we're using QuickBooks to do our numbers. There's nothing wrong with QuickBooks. I'm not trying to, but it's not a fully integrated accounting system with your ERP system. So the more you automate, the more you bring your equipment base up to speed, the more you invest in your people and get people, you're not going to replace your whole organization in a week, but as openings come, as you grow, bring people in from the outside with some fresh ideas from other companies in the industry. And you want to look at every aspect of your business, and you want to look at improving and having people that are responsible for improving different pieces of the business on a daily basis.
Tom, any thoughts on that one?
Well, really well said. So, and that process doesn't, happen overnight. And so, we keep harping on this, but, if you start looking to improve the business in all the key sectors, and you set goals and you continue to, work on those and go back and see if you've met your milestones or not, over the course of 3 or 5 years, you will have done quite a bit to improve the business. The key factors are sales and profits, but kind of like Steve was saying, if you say, well, we're going to jump 20% next year, and buyer asks why, and you say, well, we kind of guess or something, but or if you say, well, look, we're in our customer meetings every week, and we're visiting the facility, we're talking to them, and we're continually talking about how we can get more business from them. That gives the buyer a lot more confidence that you know what's happening with your customer, and you'll know whether things are going to go up or down. So yeah, that's but certainly, being very, very, very prepared and really focusing on those key drivers of performance and profitability.
The other thing that I want to do a little shameless plug for the IPC. I'm sure all the EMS participants understand what the IPC is all about, or at least they understand it from the standpoint of IPC 610 for workmanship standards and 620 for cable assemblies. But the IPC has a bunch of programs for the EMS industry that have just helped me and a lot of my colleagues tremendously over the years. Every year at Apex, we have the EMS Management Council meeting where people from small to medium EMS companies from all over the country, and actually all over the world, because we've had companies come from Europe and from Asia and from other parts of the world as well. These companies meet every year. It's a full day meeting, including some time to meet and greet other executives from the EMS. And we talk about problems that are common to the industry as a result of these meetings. I don't know if everybody's aware of these. There's an IPC EMS certification for program managers. There's an IPC validation. So the IPC comes in and does an audit to 610, to 620, to IPC 1791, which is applicable to U.S. companies, which is a trusted source. Not only looks at your workmanship, but it also looks at your NIST 800 171 customer unclassified information handling. And there's a wealth of information that's available through the trade association. And most of you are probably paying your yearly membership anyway. You might as well take advantage of a lot more programs that are out there. I've been involved with the group since 1987, and as I said, it's a shameless plug. I've been on the board of directors of the IPC for about 20 years. So the value that I've gotten out of it at various different companies is tremendous. And I think, I hate to say tremendous now. I sound like somebody else we know, but it's huge, but it's really great. It's really a great thing.
Well, one other key point, and I think for a lot of small companies, with everything that Steve said, they'll say, well, that'd be great, but I got to work 12 hours a day to make the thing run. And, especially for smaller companies, the owners have to think, what do I have to do to have the free time to work on the business instead of working all the time in the business? And the key is really delegation. The more you delegate, the more you can work on improving value and the more you reduce that key person risk. So it's a double whammy if you can do it. I don't know how to do it. I have trouble delegating myself. However, the companies that have grown, like Zentech and others, they do that. The companies that don't grow, the owner's working 12 hours a day and Sundays. So.
Yep.
One of the things one of the things that's highly important here is that if you take a look at the amount of time that people at Zentech, for instance, have spent away from the office to take part not only in meetings where we're learning from our colleagues, but also training sessions, technical sessions at Apex and other things like that. It definitely enhances the value of the business. When I was retired for 5.5 years before I came to Zentech in May of 2019, and one of the things that attracted me to this company more than anything was the fact that we are one of few companies that has 610 certification, validation and certification, 620, IPC 1791. We have certified program managers. We have certified instructors. So it's it's a company that has always invested. I wish I could say I'm responsible for it, but I joined the company because it represented somebody who I thought, when it came to the industry, was really trying to be best in breed. It wasn't the biggest company, but it was one of the most well-stocked company with the tool set. And I think that's important if you really want to look to get ahead.
I have a couple of questions that came in over the chat, so I'm going to sort of throw them at you as a group. And maybe we'll start with Jason. What do you think are going to be the biggest trends for 2021? And how have you seen the industry? I think they kind of tie together. How have you seen the industry evolve in the pandemic? And also tied into that, I think, is what's the biggest challenge currently facing EMS?
From a trend standpoint, the clients that we have in EMS have continued to operate because a lot of what they've done have been related to governmental contracts that have been essential and continue to work. So I would assume that our client base will continue to operate and do well. I think it's really, if 2020 has done anything for us, I think we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the world we live in anymore. And I think we'll figure out in a week or so what that looks like even further and add challenges from my side on how do you manage taxes? Are taxes going to change? How do you manage the PPP loans and things like that have come through? Is there any more stimulus that's going to come through? So I think all of those drivers have impact on the industry and what's going to happen. And so from that standpoint, my guess is as good as yours, but I think things are still, at least in our client base, have been steady and have been good and have been continuing to operate. So I wouldn't expect anything to drastically change going forward.
Tom?
It's interesting to, because I do think there's some level of reshoring that's happening, and some level, even if it's small, will be like a nice fresh breeze and could have a big impact on a lot of domestic producers. I don't think it's going to be a huge reshoring, but if there is, and no matter who's in the White House, if there is more emphasis on strategic industries, on tax policy to make manufacturing more competitive, things, and more training, because the industry needs trained workers. I think the manufacturers can bring back a lot of the assemblies as well as other electronics products. I do think this this current economy is going to affect a lot of smaller companies pretty hard, and it's affecting a lot of people. But and so I do suspect, especially now that the PPP money's run out and there isn't really much else stimulus, I think a fair number of companies are going to have trouble. But But as for the future, looking 3, 5, 10 years down the road, there's going to be tremendous consolidation. Whether it's 700 companies or 1,000 facilities or whatever the true number is, that's probably more than a lot more, 20, 30% more than there's going to be in 10 years or so. And that's due to the age of the average owner, and other factors. More emphasis by customers on higher end, assemblies, as well as more certification, higher end equipment, more inspection equipment, and so on.
Okay. Steve?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more of the same. The only question for us, because we're 80% defense and about 15% medical. So what happens next Tuesday is really important here, because somebody's got to pay for the trillions of dollars that's been doled out over the last 7 to 8 months. And the question is really going to be, are we paying for that from social programs, or are we cutting the defense budget? So we've really got to look closely at what happens to our customer base over the next few years. Although I've also heard that Wednesday morning we're going to wake up and COVID will be gone. So we'll see what happens with that. So who knows? I think the idea that there's a couple of things that were very unique this year, especially in the last few months. We've looked at 4 or 5 companies that told us that they have a one-time peak in the sales of electronics for ventilators. There's as the current environment changes, that business is going to go away. So when somebody has a piece of business this year that's worth a lot of money, but it's gone the next year and it wasn't there last year, how do you pay for that? How do you deal with that? These are all questions that we're going to be answering for the next 6 to 12 to 18 months.
And reading about it in history books for years.
That depends who wins too, because that matters who writes the history, right? All right.
History is history at some level. But so closing thoughts. Steve, want to give it your quick closing thoughts?
Yeah, I will.
And maybe a shout out to the buyers, since I haven't even gotten a chance to really talk about tips for buyers. So maybe your number one tip for people who are looking to acquire companies.
Well, that's actually where I was headed. We originally bought Zentech in May of 2019. And I don't know that as a matter of fact, I do know that we were not the highest price. We then bought a company in January, and we bought another company in March. In all 3 cases, we were selected because of people that we've known or I've known for a long, long time. I knew the CEO of Zentech since 2004. I've known the CEO of the other 2 companies for at least 15 or 16 years. And I believe we were selected because of those relationships. When you're selling your company, on top of all obviously the financial considerations and the business considerations, relationships are highly important. You want to know the ethics of the people that you're selling to. You want to know that they care about your employees. You want to know that their plan to flip the company in a couple of years is not going to wind up with your facility being one of the things that they close down in order to get a deal done that really, that you'll have no control over. So, there's no guarantee that the person you know best and your best friend will keep your facility open and manage it and treat your people the way you do. But you really got to take a good look at that and make sure that you're doing the best thing, not only for your pocketbook, which is still, nobody ever questions. I never question what somebody decides with their own money. However, once you get past the money thing, you got a lot of constituencies to worry about, and you just want to make sure that the people that you're getting in bed with are the right ones. And I think that's highly important. And just like you do when you get a piece of business, you want to do customers. You want to have customers that you can trust. Right. If you look at the customer, or you look at the buyer, and you say, I don't even want to have a meal with these people. I don't like them. Don't do business with them. This is a huge relationship business with all aspects: customers, suppliers, bankers, private equity guys, investment bankers, accountants, and professionals. Every step of the way, you want a relationship that you can hang your hat on.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent advice. Great advice for life in general too. Hey, Tom, what about you? What are your kind of closing thoughts and suggestions for people who are looking to acquire another company?
Well, did I mention that people should be prepared?
You might have.
Sometimes Of course, it makes my job easier. We're about 50% where we represent sellers and about 50% where we represent buyers. And the best clients are always those who are prepared and or have been involved in deals before. Almost all of our sell side custom clients have been through 2 or 3 deals that blew up, and they're wondering why, or they have their own thoughts on it. And then almost all of our buy side clients have gone either gone through a couple deals that they may have actually completed or not, but at least have been through it. And so they've all kind of been educated through experience, and that's fantastic. But just pick up a book, check out M&A on Wikipedia, whatever it takes, because the best client really is an educated client.
All right. And Jason, you get the last word today.
The accounting.
What's your advice for people who want to acquire a business, and also just your closing thoughts on mergers and acquisitions?
Closing thoughts, and I'll speak to the accounting side of it. I think, at the end of the day, the relationships are really important. Being prepared is important, but it's going to come down to the numbers that you have. And so a lot of the time, business owners, especially smaller companies, don't take numbers as important. Hey, I'm going to go worry about sales. I'm going to go worry about manufacturing. I'm going to go worry about that, and then the accounting gets pushed to the side, or it gets put on the back burner. And I think it's important to really understand your financials, really understand what you have as a business, understand what you're presenting to the seller or to the buyer, because that ultimately is going to dictate what your multiple is, and how you present those numbers and the understanding that you have. And so I think being prepared on the accounting side, understanding your financials, having good forecasts, having good processes around how those are presented, and timeliness of when they get done. If you're trying to sell a business and you don't have last year's financials done and it's October, I think the buyer's really going to question whether you have the financial processes and whether those numbers really mean anything. And so from that standpoint, don't just put the accounting on the back burner. It's really important on the valuation for the seller. And I guess that's advice for the buyer too. Understand, who you're dealing with from the standpoint of sophisticated sellers, and know what you're buying, and do your due diligence on the other side too. So there's my
good life advice for all of y'all. Be prepared, take care of the finances, have good relationships. This is like a good conversation with my mom. All right. Any further thoughts from you guys? Otherwise, I'm going to kick it back to Caitlin, and she'll take the next steps.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk. And if you guys have any questions or anything, I'll be more than happy to entertain questions and things like that. So
great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve, all for being here today and putting in the time. We really, really appreciate it. And it was nice to meet you all.
Thanks for the chance.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.